Everyone knows that if you want to win your bracket with your friends, you're going to have to pick the champion correctly in March Madness. In this video, we're going to teach you exactly how to identify and pick the winners given this year's slate. Let's jump right into it, Slee. I think there's a lot of good information here. You're looking at these teams, and over history, there were some trends that emerged among March Madness champions. One of them being elite defenses. Defense wins championships is the old adage. That doesn't have any difference, whether it's NFL, NCAA, any other sport. Defense matters. Upperclassmen, you're going to want to have guys that have been there before, either in March or been playing long in their career. Having great guards has always been a big deal in college basketball. The guys control the tempo. They take the ball up the court every time. They touch the ball every possession. It's a very big deal. Using not only KenPom data, but also ESPN BPI has actually been a very great indicator of tournament champions. The conference that these teams are in matters. 3-point percentage matters. And of course, head coaching matters. And that's something that's long been the case in college basketball. So we're going to go into each of the stats for every single one of these points. But before we do, make sure you like the video. Definitely subscribe to this channel for the next month and a half. We're going to have some great content here with college basketball. Sliwa has been great in his career picking March Madness tournaments, and I got a ton of stats compiled for you guys to help perfect your bracket. So Sliwa, first thing we wanted to talk about, elite defenses. There's no stranger to anybody that defense matters, but you look at the winners since 2002, when I went as far back. All these teams had a defensive ranking of top 25 in the KenPom rankings. It is really a non-negotiable if you're trying to pick a champion here. And so when you think about that, what are some teams that people are throwing out there as potential champions that you think this could perhaps disqualify?
So yeah, starting with the teams that fall outside of this category. First one would be Kentucky. We've talked about them a lot all season. Really explosive offense, arguably the most talented team in the country. And you see them have great games. Like they just beat Tennessee on the road this last weekend, but they're so inconsistent because the defense isn't there night in and night out. So it's really hard to rely on them to win 6 games in a row, and that pretty much takes them out of the contention according to these statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Another one would be Baylor this year. That's kind of been Baylor's Achilles heel the last 3 years now since they won it all. But they haven't had a great defense since that championship team, and we've kind of seen them sputter down the stretch, and especially in March, the last couple seasons. Since then, relying a little bit too much on shooting and just not really bringing it on the defensive end. Another team that we've talked about too is Illinois.
Yeah.
They've trended in the wrong direction too. They were closer to being a solid defense a couple months ago. After TSJ came back, it seemed like they forgot about how to play defense and just relied fully on scoring the ball. So, I mean, these are teams that have been inconsistent all season. We've seen them kind of sitting around the teens to later. I mean, but then you'll see them knock off a really good team, and that's because they shoot the ball well, they score well, but they're not playing solid defense every single night. And I mean, it's definitely probably the most important statistic when we're going into March Madness because I mean, you could be the top offense, but you could still have a bad night shooting the ball.
You can't rely on your offense to put up 85 to 90 points every night. You're not going to win 6 games like that, especially when you run into a solid defense, which a lot of these teams in the top 25 KenPom rankings have a great defense. So you're just not going to get that kind of output night in and night out in the span of that March tournament.
Right. And I mean, that's what makes Houston such a big favorite this year. In the last 3 years, they've had the number one defense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no surprise that they've been that number one team in the AP poll for the majority of the last 3 years, too, because that defense is so great. Even Purdue, they're in the top. They have the 20th rated defense now. And then Creighton has the 21st rated defense.
Yeah.
Just one note on them. I saw this stat last weekend, but they are the only two teams in Power Five conference that foul the opposing team, like in the least. They're the top
They're
20
not
teams in
defending team.
fouls against, and I mean in that you could almost. I mean those two teams, what do they have in common? They have a 7-foot center guarding the paint, who's basically just. I mean, you're not going to foul the guy going by you because you know it's the shot's still going to be contested at the rim. So I mean,
That's a big
having a
deal.
7-footer, having a rim protector, that matters as well. But I mean, Houston, you get it done in different ways. Like Houston, Iowa State is a top defense in the country. They've really ridden that the whole season. They weren't supposed to be a great team this year, but they've really been honestly one of the better teams in the Big 12. Taman Lipsey made a big jump, but that defense is carrying them. And a lot of people have still kind of fade them just because they don't have the huge names or the spark plays. But defense has been winning them games, and it's kept them going to 24-7 now in the Big 12. So yeah, defense is always huge. North Carolina, they started playing defense this year, as opposed to last year, and I mean, just see the difference. I mean, they missed
Fighting
the
back.
tournament,
Yeah.
and now they're a top 10 team who is going to have a one or a two, maybe a one seed even, depending how the next week or two plays out.
Yeah.
But, but yeah, defense has always been huge. I mean, that's a big reason I've always loved Villanova and Virginia in the past. Um, kind of before we even started the channel, those were two of my main teams. I mean, Tony Bennett with Virginia, they always have a great defense. They do this year too. I mean, they're talent wise, they're probably one of the worst teams in the Power Five, but they have like over 23 wins just solely because they play good defense. Like when they play a really good team, they get destroyed because they can't
Yeah.
score the ball. But but like that defense wins them games. Like and defense is the most consistent thing night in and night out. So I mean, you always want to rely on or a solid defense. And if you have a solid rim protector too, that's always going to help. Look at UConn with Donovan Clingan. He's an absolute animal in the paint. So like these really good teams that fall within these categories, they have rim protectors. But I mean, Houston, Iowa State, if you just play really strong defense, you're going to win a lot of basketball games.
Yeah, you make the other teams make the mistake, make them struggle, and then lean back into, your strength and your abilities. And that's what really good teams do with good coaching. So we'll see. Again, top 25 is the real key metric here, for the defense. At the end of the conference tournament, keep an eye on that. And I really strongly suggest not picking a team that is outside of that top 25 defensive team, because it just hasn't been done at least in the last 20 years. It's
I mean,
so improbable.
even think about San Diego State last year. Nobody had them going far. Is like I
They
think
had
they
a
were a five
great
seed, but
defense.
they
Yeah.
had a great defense and they made the championship game without being able to really score the ball because their defense was that good.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could ride it almost all the way.
You really can. It's wild. And number two, Sliwa, a big thing here, especially like one, let's have a good defense. Number two, let's pick a team that relies on upperclassmen. Doesn't have to be the best player, but certainly have a vital role. And I want you to get into how that's kind of changed this year, the landscape of college basketball, upperclassmen. But you can see in the past few years, it's really dominated by juniors and seniors. If you're UConn, you're usually a pretty well-rounded team. So it's whoever steps up in that championship game that gets it. Happen to be a couple sophomores. Anthony Davis is a freshman getting it. We haven't seen a player in college basketball like Anthony Davis in some time now. So I'm not too surprised there. And Tyus Jones, the one real outlier there for me, although he did great for Duke that championship season. But
Yeah.
what were you saying before about how upperclassmen are a little bit different this year in terms of these contending teams?
Yeah, I mean, we saw it with the NIL and the transfer portal this last summer. The top teams, they were going for seniors and grad transfers. I mean, look at Connecticut, Cam Spencer, grad transfer from Rutgers. And he's playing his best year of basketball on UConn as a starter. He was first team All Big East. Pair him with Tristan Newton, another senior, another player, first team All Big East. But a lot of these teams have been renting these upperclassmen, and it's been paying off immensely. I mean, look at Tennessee with Dalton Connect coming over from Northern Colorado, just taking
Wow.
the SEC by storm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like a 1 year rental. Even look at Arizona, Caleb Love, the transfer in his senior year, he just won Pac-12 Player of the Year his first year at Arizona. North Carolina picked up Cormac Ryan, and he was really the reason they just beat Duke
Yeah.
this last weekend. He was playing out of his mind. But you just see these upperclassmen go crazy. Same deal with Illinois. Marcus Damask from Southern Illinois. Uh, multiple
TSJ the year
30-point
before
games.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, kept them honestly kept the whole season alive with like the TSJ suspension and whatnot.
Mhm.
He's been a really solid player for them. But yeah, I mean, even think like I mean, this one's super obvious, but Hunter Dickinson going to Kansas, like
Yep.
he's been a beast for them. But yeah, these upperclassmen, I mean, teams are littered with them, especially because of the portal and like these seniors, they know it's their last year or two, so they're going to go to these top teams. One team that I would be worried about though, when we're talking about this is Duke. They
Hmm.
do have Jeremy Roach, who's the senior, but he's the only senior on the roster,
Yep.
and that was honestly a big reason why I took UNC against them. They've got two seniors who've started all their careers there. They have the transfer senior Cormac Ryan. They just have a lot more experience, and when you're talking about like a big game, like could be your last game, you're just gonna get that extra ounce out of a player that you might not be able to. I mean, it's just
Yep.
yeah, you
It,
can't just conjure it, but
it's the experience, but it's also the poise too to be able to stay composed in that big moment. And there's no bigger moment than March Madness, obviously. And I think how you react, like you can't predict that, and that reaction can't be understated. Some guys are just born to live in that moment, and some are born to fade away. And you do get some experience though, the more years you play and the more times you make the tournament. So that's where I think being an upperclassman matters a lot too. I think it's interesting, Slee, when you look at this list, though, all these guys, for the most part, were like obviously Anthony Davis, but a homegrown talent. It's not like these guys these teams rented a player for a year to get this championship. Like these guys stuck it out with the team for 2, 3 years before they got their championship. It's not that way anymore. The entire landscape of college basketball has changed with this transfer portal, for better or for worse, but it makes teams with a lot of young, raw talent much better when you can go out and grab a senior, a fifth year in the transfer portal and instantly catapult your team to one of the best teams in the country, but two, a team with suddenly more experience than they had the year before, much more experience
yeah.
than the year they
I
had
mean,
before.
Tennessee's whole season would have been completely different had like this not been an NAL year where Dalton Connect could
Mm-hmm.
come in and play right away. I mean, if you sit on the bench, they wouldn't be top five right now. Um, Even Connecticut, I mean, Cam Spencer, like his transfer to Connecticut cannot be understated. Because they brought back a lot of their forwards, but other than Tristan Newton, I mean Hassan Diarra, they're loaded, but Cam Spencer is I mean he's what makes them elite. Like this team is almost untouchable, and, and yeah, just yeah, these the transfers and like the top teams that are that much better in college basketball, and that's why
Yep.
you don't see like teams going 31-3 or undefeated is because the playing field is so much more level. All these the top players on the mid majors are transferring to the better or the better teams, honestly,
Yeah, the
the
blue
Power
bloods,
Five
really.
teams.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's just kind of how college basketball is going to go going forward. I just remember seeing a stat, and we mentioned a while ago, but it was like December, January, and it was like looking at the AP poll from 10, 20 years ago, and the amount of teams with no losses or just one loss versus this year was crazy. Like,
Yep.
like the playing field is so much more level, and we saw that in last year's March Madness with FAU versus San Diego State, and then Miami versus like these are lower seeds making it really far. And I mean, it was super exciting early on. I mean, kind of knocked off some of the excitement in the Final Four, but I mean, you just don't know who's going to make it because all these teams are really good.
Yeah, that makes for a great college basketball season in March Madness tournament. And let's try to package these last two together into another piece here of picking a champion. You want to have upperclassmen, you want to have great defense, and what other teams have great guards too. You look at these most outstanding player of the tournament, these players for the most part are guards. And so you really want a team, it doesn't have to be your best player, but you certainly want to have a team where you're taking the ball up and you have full confidence in that player that's taking the ball up to create a shot for himself, to get something going for that offense and create space. You don't have that. It makes things really difficult as an offense. So you're looking at teams with great guards. If you are considering a team without one, I think it's a pretty quick no for that perspective. Any teams that come to mind that are really big, heavy, that you would not be confident with the guard taking the ball up, down one with 5 seconds left?
I mean, the first one, just because I mean, kind of going from the top, we'll have to mention Purdue. I am a little bit 50-50 on them. I mean, Braden Smith, like they brought back pretty much all these guards from last year from the big collapse in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I don't fully trust him, but he's definitely improved and he's shown he can make those big plays. It's just yeah, I would probably lean with another team or another guard a little bit more. Another
Yeah.
team that I'm worried about though is Auburn. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we've mentioned they're really deep team. There's just a lot of solid players, but yeah, they don't really have a guard you're just going to give the ball to and say go make a bucket. Like their
Yeah.
best player is John Broom. He's a center, and then the other 9 guys are all pretty good. So I think Auburn, like when they get down, they really struggle. They don't shoot the three ball really well. So they're kind of a front runner team that I would be worried of in that regard. But yeah, a lot of the other teams, like I mean, a lot of these other top teams have really good guards, but another one that I would say doesn't is Gonzaga. They got Andrew Nemhard from Creighton,
Hmm.
but he hasn't been too effective. They kept Nolan Hickman, who hasn't been that great either. I just think it's Gonzaga's really down this year. I think it's the worst team they've had in a decade. And while they've kind of turned it around this second half of the season, I don't see them getting it done. I could see Gonzaga easily losing in the first round of the tournament.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, I think another one that we could even touch on is Kansas. I don't think they have the guards that are going to go get you a bucket. Um, that's another team I think that's a big front runner.
Hmm.
Kind of led by Hunter Dickinson, another team that's led by a post. Jalen Wilson was like the guard forward last year. You kind of have McCullough now, but yeah, I mean, Dewan Harris has improved a lot. He could shoot the ball now, which he couldn't do last year. But I mean, I'm not you're not going to give him the ball and tell you to go get a bucket in the last 3 minutes. It's
Yeah.
probably going to be McCullough or Dickinson, and yeah, I just don't rely on them to create a shot and maybe hit a jump shot as much as you would with a lot of these other teams.
It's going to come up in March. There's going to be a close game. You're going to need to be able to put up points in a quick succession, and that isn't conducive to feed the ball in the post, dribble back him down, 4 seconds, turn and hook. That's not a quick play. It gives the defense a lot of time to adapt. That's something that you need to have a guard to really create a big play in a big moment late in the game when it's close. And like you said, those teams that you mentioned, not primed for that moment. And so something to really consider. And we talked a lot about Ken Palm stats. Sliwa, I think something that really gets overlooked a lot is ESPN's BPI rankings here. You see this stat that 10 of the last 13 champions, UConn is an outlier almost every year, have ranked within the top three at the end of this season, at the end of the conference championships in terms of ESPN BPI. We still have the conference championships, but right now, you want to take a guess on the top three teams?
I mean, my guess would have to be Houston, Purdue,
Houston.
UConn.
Yeah, it is Houston, Purdue, UConn. Guess who's number four? I don't think you're gonna get this one.
Um, don't tell me. Trying to think who is it? North Carolina?
No, no, they're not even in top 10 somehow.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Tennessee? I
No,
don't know.
Tennessee's five.
Arizona?
It's Arizona. And I know you're not big in Arizona this year, but Arizona is the fourth team ESPN BPI. And while it's not quite there, um, I think that speaks a lot to the strength of Arizona there. So, but yes, Houston right now, Houston, UConn, Purdue. We just talked about Purdue being a little scary there with the guard. So I think it kind of narrows it down, at least in this sense, to Houston or UConn pick if we're using this stat alone. So something to keep in mind there too. But there's still some time for movement. You've got the conference championships. A lot can change. Although Houston did have a pretty big lead at number one over everybody else. You mentioned Gonzaga not having a good year. It kind of goes to this rule number 5 of being in the power conference. You just look at the history. Big schools from power conferences have had a ton of success since the turn of the century. Every year, people have the same slant against Gonzaga. They did it against Houston until recently. Of all these mid-major schools that have great regular season records, going close to undefeated, getting 30 wins in the season, but not translating that success to the tournament. It's happened too much, it seems like, for it to be an anomaly. So I think it's a great move from Houston going to the Big 12 because that kind of puts them in contention immediately with being a pretty strong conference, especially in this year. But you get teams like San Diego State, which you just mentioned went to the championship last year. They're not in a power conference. Dayton's who's having a great year, not a power conference. St. Mary's and Gonzaga, not a power conference. So something to keep an eye on. We don't have it this year as much as normal, where a top 5 KenPom team is outside of a power conference, but it's always something to keep in mind when building out the bracket.
Yeah, and I mean this is more of a stretch on this rule here, but I mean you mentioned not I'm not the biggest fan of Arizona this season, and that's just because the Pac-12 has been so unbelievably weak. Arizona was battle tested early in the season, and they played well, but I just feel like they haven't played enough good basketball or enough good teams over the last 3 months to be that well prepared to win 6 in a row.
Yeah.
I think it's going to hurt them down the stretch. It's just because how weak that conference was this year.
Yeah, we will definitely see how that plan pans out for them. You certainly haven't heard as much from Arizona as you have in the past few years. Haven't heard their name called as much as all these teams in SEC, Big 12, Big East, ACC. So we'll see how things pan out for them. But like you said, without the true battle test again in the regular season, with the weaker conferences here for the Pac-12, that might do them in. So we'll keep an eye. Rule number 6, and this probably doesn't surprise anybody, but teams that win the championship have been very good from behind the arc, especially as of late. You know, you see kind of the Steph Curry effect in the NBA trickling into college basketball, where more and more teams that are winning the national championship are lighting it up from beyond the arc. You know, you get so much more space out there, so much more ability to make plays behind the arc. And, you know, the NCAA is no exception here. And so some teams, Sliwa, and some teams that we've already mentioned that have been really good from three. Kentucky's actually number 1 in NCAA in 3-point field goal percentage. Other teams that made the tournament: Purdue at number 2, Dayton, the 3rd best team, Baylor, the 5th best team in terms of 3-point percentage, Duke having a very solid percentage, being 12th in the league. Looking at other teams in the top 50, Arizona is the 23rd best team. Just skip a few. Alabama's a really good 3-point shooting team, to no surprise. Drake, who, you know, won the Missouri Valley Conference, they're a solid 3-point shooting team. UConn, to no surprise, good 3-point shooting team. Although it is a little surprising to me that they're the 42nd best team in terms of 3-point field goal percentage. You would think that they had more than that, or better than that, but they kind of robbed the top 50 in terms of potential teams that could win it, that are, you know, also really good 3-point shooting teams. So what kind of concerns me is, you know, we talked a lot about Houston. They don't really fit that criteria of a great 3-point shooting team. Does that concern you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying it all season. I know they have a great defense. They've joined the Big 12, so they're more battle tested this year. But I don't think they have the scores that they've had in the past. Between blanking on the other one now, but I know they had Sasser. They used to
Yeah.
have Grimes a few years ago, but uh, yeah, I just think they've had better scores in the past. Jamal Shed, great point guard. I mean, that would really qualify you for having a top guard to kind of lead you. But yeah, as far as when it comes to 3-point shooting, like when Houston gets down, which isn't often at all, I do think they're going to have a hard time coming back into the game. They could create those turnovers, so they could create those extra possessions. But yeah, I think like they could still find other ways to win, but I think that has been a big one of their issues for the last couple seasons now is just consistent scoring, and especially from beyond the arc. Like we see them go down in the tournament and then just kind of let it fall away. Um, they always seem to just sputter at
They
some point.
do. And, you know, they don't get down that often because they do have the number 1 ranked defense. But, you know, things that you can't explain are going to happen in the March Madness tournament. Houston's going to face some hard times. They're going to face a situation, perhaps even early on, where they find themselves down. And that's where you need to be able to rely on all parts of your game, especially parts that haven't traditionally won you games in the regular season, that you need to rely on now, given the situation. They could certainly see their lack of 3-point shooting come back to bite them. I wouldn't say they're terrible. They're shooting about 35% from behind the arc. That's not too bad, but it's
That's pretty
130 in college basketball. So it's not quite that caliber of the teams that we've seen recently win the championship. You know, it's been closer to like that 38%, 37, 38 percentage, and even more recently, closer to 40% from beyond the arc. Not too many teams this year shooting above 40%, but the only ones being Dayton, Purdue, and Kentucky, which is worth noting. But it's not a,
yeah.
it's not a hard
Dayton
and
was the
fast
one
rule.
that surprised me for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll see. Again, keep an eye on those teams. You can make up points in a hurry if you can just string together threes. And the final one, which you had a great point earlier today, having proven head coaching. You know, these guys have been around for a while. They have a system that works. They have set plays, and philosophies that they can just get players in and out year after year, plug them into their system and get results. You look at these coaches, they've had a great pedigree. I think a lot of the teams that are being considered as NCAA champion have a lot of coaching with pedigree, but I think it just speaks to the fact that whether you're picking a champion or a team to go far, head coaching matters more than meets the eye, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't think of this one before actually, but I do wonder how much Hubert Davis. I mean, he's only in his third year now with North Carolina. So yeah, I mean, former player, so he obviously knows a ton about the program and basketball in general. But yeah, he hasn't been a head coach for a while. So a
Yeah.
team I do really like is North Carolina. I mean, you could say the same for Duke with John Shire.
Hmm.
So the two powerhouses in the ACC, they do have younger, newer coaches that aren't necessarily as proven as a lot of these other top teams. So I think that's still something to look at. And
Very
then
much. That's good. I
one,
mean, it's someone that also likes UNC. I think that's very concerning having a
yeah,
pretty junior coach.
I do, yeah. It's really tough to say too, though, because like at the same time, he completely turned the program around, like improving that defense. Like the job he's done at North Carolina has been really impressive this season. But yeah, you never know when when it hits March. Another one that I mean, it's not like a massive name, but Will Wade was with LSU before when they were making the tournament. If you notice, LSU's basketball program's kind of fallen off.
Mhm.
Because I believe he got kicked out of the program. But anyways, he's with McNeese State right now. They're 29-3 in his first season at McNeese State. He's probably going to get a big contract next year to move up to a better team. But I think McNeese State's a team that you might want to take a little flyer on because that was a coach that took a downward movement more so because of um, like
Certain.
scandals.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would even think about that. Like, they had a really rough draw the year before, but yeah, like Iona played UConn in the first round, and they played them pretty well with Rick
Yeah.
Pitino. Rick
Yep. Yep.
Pitino,
Yep.
head
Yep.
coach. So yeah, you definitely want these proven head coaches, and you could kind of find them on some of these not as well-known teams like maybe McNeese. So yeah, definitely do your research on the head coaching side. But yeah, for the most part, a lot of these teams in the top 25 have really good coaches. But we did mention those ACC guys that are a little bit newer.
Yeah. And that takes us to our summary, Sliwa. If I was someone that listened to this whole video and I had to distill what we had to say and looking at this, it's hard for me to not pick UConn based on what we just said. You talk about the upperclassmen they have. We talk about great coaching. He doesn't. Dan Hurley doesn't necessarily have a ton of wins, but he's got a championship ring under their belt. They're a top 3 ESPN BPI team. They've got a top 50 3-point shooting team, and they've got a pretty solid defense. While it's not a top 10, it's certainly in that top 25 criteria, and their offense certainly makes up for it. So I think it's hard not to say UConn based on what we just said. I think there are still teams that can kind of squeak in here. They don't have to fit into every single one of these traits necessarily to win, but I think UConn's the only one that we talked about that does. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean that's why I've been so high on UConn all season, and it does kind of suck. You pick the team that just won it all,
No one wants to
but
do that.
but when you talk about like a complete basketball team that really doesn't have a weakness, that's UConn. Even I mean, there's this guy Evan Maya on Twitter, but he does like advanced stats, like just basically overall plus minus for players, but looking into everything in the game. And even Hassan Diarra, like their six man, was like the top rated six man in the country.
That's crazy. This is
Like
top
like you like UConn is just so filthy. But that's why you want to, if you do want to pick somebody to beat UConn, like you're going to want to pick a really good 3-point shooting team. You're going to want to pick somebody who could get hot, who could get lucky. You never know what the draw is going to be. But yeah, I think UConn's one of my favorites this season. Didn't
teams
mention on the last
that
side, but um, like Iowa State fits a lot of these categories, but their head coach is also a very young guy, TJ Otzelberger. But they're a top defense. Taman Lipsey's a top guard. Um, I don't think they shoot the ball particularly great, so that's probably another one. But yeah, I think there's a couple of weaknesses on the Iowa State side where you might not want to take them all the way.
the one team that I think, based on what we said, that can fit this criteria, except maybe coaching, is Arizona, top 4 BPI. They're a good 3-point shooting team. Actually, a better 3-point shooting team based on percentages than UConn. They've got the scores that we talked about. We talked about Pac-12 Player of the Year. The one thing I'm concerned about there then, and they have the KenPom rankings. They have the 8th best offense, 15th best defense. The thing is, their head coach, his name is Tommy Lloyd. What do you know about him?
No, I mean he's a good coach. He sweats his ass off.
They got another one of those.
He wears like a white um, shirt. And he's just always
Just like
soaked. But
Sean
no,
Miller. Yeah.
no, he's a good coach. I personally don't know a ton about his background. Haven't watched a lot of Pac-12 basketball this year, but that's my biggest qualm with them is how weak the conference is. But honestly, Arizona's probably a really good pick this March. They played great early in the season. If I'm remembering right, they were one of the teams that beat Purdue, maybe. I could be completely
I
wrong on
might,
that,
I
but
might
they had some big wins early in the year, and yeah, I could see them being one of them. Another one that I've kind of hinted at, but I do think Creighton is always a threat to make a big run.
Yeah, they did last year.
McDermott's been there forever. He just
Yep.
got a huge extension. Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman's the upperclassman. And then you got the 7-footer. They guard the paint. They shoot the ball really well. So yeah, I think Creighton kind of falls into that too if you want like more of a sleeper pick. But I mean, they're still 9th overall in Ken Palm.
Yeah, but like no matter what their ranking is, people always sleep on Creighton just because they're Creighton. And I don't think they've ever won it. And it's tough to win the first one, but no matter what, like you look at the names that are next to Creighton and above Creighton, and people are always going to turn the other way when they think about that program because they're not a North Carolina, they're not a Duke, Arizona, Tennessee, Purdue, UConn, Houston. They don't fit that same caliber in people's minds, despite the Ken Palm rankings saying that they are within that same league there. But I think that's a really valid point because there's going to be a lot of people that are making brackets that are just going to discredit Creighton simply because they play in Nebraska. They play in Omaha and they don't do anything in the history of the program in terms of winning championships. But I make them go far in my bracket despite every year for the points that you just made, and I think it's certainly not worth the discounting them based on any perceived weakness of the program.
Yeah, no, I think they're right there in the mix.
I
Trying to
think yeah,
think of another one.
there's not a ton.
I,
It's hard to have
honestly,
a criteria to pick
they
a
kind of fell off, but they did fall into the criteria earlier in the season, and I do think they potentially could again. But at BYU,
Yep.
that's another deep team, a lot of shooters.
Their
Uh,
defense is what's falling off for them.
exactly, yeah. Which I mean, we kind of mentioned is the number one. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Like it can't
we'll
happen.
see
It
how they
doesn't
do
happen.
in
Defense.
the Big 12 tournament. But
Don't even think about picking a team if they don't have a top 25 Ken Palm defense. It's a waste of time. You're losing. Might as well burn that bracket. You're not winning. So we'll see what happens. I really think it comes down to like, hey, pick Houston if you can look past the 3-point shooting. UConn, if you can look past it, picking the obvious favor that everyone else in your bracket is going to pick. I think based on what we mentioned, Arizona would be a great pick to kind of make a real contender as the winner of your bracket, but also a team that really fits all this criteria. If you're trying to go out there and win some money and differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack while still picking someone realistic, I think Arizona, based on what we just said, really checks all those boxes.
yeah, no, I agree. I'm just a little bit against them because of the schedule, but at the same time, Ken Palm says it's the 24th toughest schedule they've played.
They've
So
got they've got a
maybe
tougher
that's kind of
schedule than
picking hairs.
Connecticut. They got a tougher schedule than a lot of teams. Um, so you can't argue with Kempom. His word is God.
That's right.
All right, everyone, keep an eye out for the rest of our videos. I thought this sleeper was incredibly valuable, just even for me, and I hope for everyone else. And we're going to have just as much great content coming out within the next week or two. So keep an eye out.